The mayor very kindly hosted the round table with community leaders and leaders in the Jewish community following the aftermath of the anti-Semitic terror attack at the congregation Beth Israel. When that attack was ongoing, the eyes of Texas, the eyes of the entire country, the eyes of the world were on North Texas. Were on this horrific act of terror being carried out in our backyard. And I will say it is an incredible blessing that the 4 individuals held hostage were able to survive and come out unharmed. It was truly a blessing from God. While the hostage attack was going on, Heidi and I were lifting up the people that were in harm's way, lifting them up in prayer. At the same time, while the incident was playing forward, I was in communication. I spoke with a special agent in charge of the FBI who was leading the investigation here. I wanted to make sure that they had all the federal resources they needed, they had all the assets needed to end the hostage situation. At the time, the hostage rescue team was in the air coming from Quantico. I was informed they had, between federal, state, and local, all the resources needed to mobilize and end the situation. I will say there was great heroism from law enforcement to go in to take out the terrorist and to save lives. That being said, the Jewish community is still in shock, is mourning. The following week, Friday night, I went to Shabbat services at Congregation Beth Israel in Houston, simply to show my support for the community, that we stand together. And I have to say, and Mayor, this is something that, as we were all talking about upstairs, Texas is a big state. We've seen tragedy, whether tragedy from terror, tragedy from crime, tragedy from natural disaster, be it a hurricane or a tornado. And every time tragedy strikes the state of Texas, consistently we see Texans come together. We see Texans help each other, support each other, and that's what we've seen in this community as well. And so we had a very productive conversation about steps that we can take to keep synagogues and keep places of worship safer, to protect them. We also had a serious conversation about how this terrorist was able to come into this country. There are very serious questions about, did the system fail in enabling him to come from the United Kingdom to the United States? What indications were there of criminal activity, of radicalization? Those are questions that I'm asking the Department of Justice, I'm asking the FBI, I'm asking the Department of Homeland Security. What could we have done differently to prevent this terrorist from coming to the United States? But at the end of the day, I want to commend the heroism, Rabbi Charlie, and each of the congregants who were there, who were calm under pressure, and their calm and focus on getting everyone out of there safely played an incredible role in preventing what could have been much, much worse. And then law enforcement engaged in a vigorous way that kept everyone safe, and so we're grateful for that. Mayor, do you have?
I want to thank you, Senator, for coming and joining the Jewish community and Federation coming, and we really thank you and appreciate that. As you said, we really celebrate the outcome of this because all the hostages were unharmed. I want to take the opportunity to thank all of our local cities and local law enforcement agencies, the state, the Department of Public Safety, the governor who called me that day. The FBI did a phenomenal job. And what was just impressive about this entire event, the seamless integration of all those law enforcement agencies working together perfectly. You would not have known the difference walking through the operations center when it was going on. And I commend them and thank them. The amount of support that poured into this community from everywhere was just fantastic. And the amount of prayer that went into this, we really appreciate it because this was a divine outcome. There was an answer to prayer in the way this finished. So I thank everybody.
Amen. Happy to answer some questions. Jack.
Senator, did you have a chance to meet with any of those held hostage this morning? What did they share? And then my other question is regarding anti-Semitism. The Jewish Federation of Dallas reports that there was a 127% increase in anti-Semitic activity in 2020 from 2019. And
So I didn't meet in person with the rabbi or the congregants that were held hostage. I've spoken with all four of them on the phone. Had good discussions. Just wanted to let them know that we were thinking of them. We were praying for them. We had their back. I wanted to see, do they need anything? Is there anything we can do to help? Obviously, each of them is dealing with this trauma, and it's a trauma that they will have to deal with for a long time. I will say the heroism they demonstrated was extraordinary. When it comes to anti-Semitism is a unique and horrific evil. And it is an evil that we are seeing escalating across the country and across the world. It is an evil that goes back millennia, thousands of years. The virulent hatred of the Jewish people is wrong, it is evil, it is horrific, it is dangerous, and it has been used to justify some of the most horrific atrocities this planet has ever seen. In my time in the Senate, I have been the leading defender of the State of Israel in the United States Senate for the past decade, and that is a labor of love from the heart. When it comes to standing and fighting against anti-Semitism, that is something I've been proud to lead on. You know, we saw several years ago, sadly, some of the radical anti-Israel members of the House of Representatives repeating anti-Semitic tropes, tropes that have been used to justify horrific wrongs against the Jewish people for a long time. The House of Representatives tried to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. Nancy Pelosi introduced the resolution condemning anti-Semitism, and sadly, the Democratic conference couldn't agree on it. Because of the squad, because of the strong anti-Israel sentiment, they couldn't pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. When that happened, I thought it was important that we see a strong bipartisan condemnation of anti-Semitism. So I went in the Senate to Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, obviously was the running mate of Hillary Clinton. And I went to Tim and said, Tim, can we do better on the Senate side? Can we come together clearly and unequivocally and condemn anti-Semitism? We drafted a resolution. The resolution was the Cruz-Kaine resolution that clearly and explicitly condemns anti-Semitism as a unique evil, as an evil that goes back thousands of years. It condemns BDS, the boycott, divestiture, and sanction movement, which targets unfairly the state of Israel and is a manifestation of anti-Semitism. It condemns the anti-Semitic tropes that came from the squad as anti-Semitism. And I have to say I was proud, very proud, that the United States Senate passed that resolution 100-0, unanimously. We brought together every Republican and every Democrat condemning anti-Semitism. That's the sort of unity we need standing against anti-Semitism. Jack, you asked about federal programs. There are federal programs right now that provide funding to help with synagogues and churches and mosques and houses of worship harden their physical safety and infrastructure, be able to stand against an act of terror, an act of violence. A lot of the discussion upstairs was about how we could improve that program. I am working, number one, to get clear accountability. One of the things I heard is that many of the synagogues who have applied to this grant program have been turned down. And they've been turned down. That they don't have clear visibility on why they've been turned down. I and my team are going to work to try to get answers from the Biden administration, from the Department of Justice, from FEMA, as to how many houses of worship have applied for these programs, how many have been received funding, how many have been turned down, what the criteria have been, and what the results have been. Which houses of worship have been subject to acts of violence in the aftermath. And I intend to work to significantly increase the funding that is available so that more houses of worship are able to receive grants to harden and strengthen their facilities. I wish we lived in a world where a house of worship didn't need to worry about an act of violence, an act of terrorism. But there is evil in this world, and we have seen synagogues targeted. In this instance, the terror was clearly anti-Semitic. This terrorist targeted the congregation Beth Israel because they were Jews. And it is hate that we've seen across the world, but we need to respond to that hate by keeping our citizens safe, and that is a fight I've been engaged in a long time, and I'll continue to do so.
Senator, did you hear any answers to the questions you've been asking regarding his entry into the United States?
I have not. So I've joined with a number of other senators asking the Attorney General, asking the head of the FBI, asking the head of Homeland Security why he came in, what we knew about his criminal record, what we knew about his terrorist ties, what we knew about his radicalization. At this point, we haven't gotten an answer, and I will say it's frustrating that the Biden administration is extraordinarily slow in responding to congressional oversight, and so we just get crickets chirping. And I'm going to continue pressing. I'm going to continue fighting. Because there's a Democratic majority in the Senate, I don't have the ability to call a hearing. Only the majority can call a hearing. What I can do is question witnesses that show up at a hearing that gets called by the Democrats. So the next hearing that I have an opportunity to question them, I'll question them directly. I'm going to keep pressing for answers. But as of now, the administration has not provided answers, and I think the American people deserve to know what did we know and how could we have prevented this terrorist from coming to America and committing this act of terror.
Is there anything else that was discussed today that you learned and weren't aware of?
You know, most of the discussion today was really to listen to the community, and I tried hard in a roundtable like this to spend more time listening than talking, and just hearing the concerns. You know, it's one thing to see an act of terror that is on the other side of the world, in the Middle East, where you know, we've tragically seen far too many acts of terror. It's another thing to see it in Tarrant County. You know, a whole lot of folks feel like, well, that can't happen here. That can't happen in our community. And I will say it's disconcerting. I know it's disconcerting to the Jewish community across the state, but it's disconcerting to all of us, whether Jewish or not, that this sort of terror, it can happen anywhere. And we need to be vigilant. We need to stand up against it. We need to condemn it for what it is. And we need to mobilize all of the tools necessary to keep Texans safe. And have led that fight for a long time and intend to continue doing so.
Senator, and you may not have this in front of you, but for the everyday church leader who may not know how to access this funding that you speak of, what do you recommend to them?
Well, the application goes through the state, and there's a specific process, and there are a series of questions, and it's graded based on points in terms of the funding for additional resources to harden a house of worship. You can work with the state government, and the state government in turn works with the federal government. You know, I'll also say, in talking to the members of this congregation, one of the things that amazed me is all four of them shared that they had terror response training, that they had gone through training what happens if a terrorist comes and targets us. Now, pause for a second and think, how horrific is it that someone going to worship God and give thanks has to go through training like that? But at the same time, every one of the congregants shared with me that training helped save their lives, that the way they behaved in there with this deranged gunman in terms of locating where they were close to the exit door so that they could be in a position to exit quickly if the opportunity arose. Rabbi Charlie, who threw a chair at the gunman, which provided the critical seconds for the congregants to escape from the synagogue. I mean, there was incredible calm in the face of enormous pressure, and the training that they had very possibly saved their lives. And I do think that's an encouragement. One of the things we talked about in the roundtable is that we ought to be encouraging more congregations, both synagogues, but houses of worship across the board. We have seen that there are terrorists and criminals that target houses of worship, and the more people are prepared, here's what to do in an attack, the more likely we are to see lives saved.
Senator, now that we've learned how the hostage taker was able to obtain a gun here in Texas, are there any plans, through enforcement or policy to address that?
Well, we're still finding out the details, but as we understand, he got a gun from someone who was himself a criminal, who it was illegal for him to possess a gun, and tragically, that is how the vast majority of gun crimes happen, is they get their guns illegally from criminals who it is already illegal for them to possess guns. And that's one of the reasons why in the Senate, I have led the charge for targeting criminals and felons and preventing them from getting firearms. Back in 2013, I introduced legislation, the Cruz legislation, that is focused on improving the background check system, making sure that felonies and serious mental health adjudications are in the background check situation. Cruz would have created a gun crime task force of the Department of Justice that is targeted on prosecuting felons and fugitives who try to illegally buy firearms. That if you buy a firearm illegally, you try to buy a firearm illegally, I think you should be prosecuted and put in jail. And unfortunately, when we voted on Cruz, the Democrats in the Senate filibustered the bill. The bill got the most bipartisan support of any of the comprehensive legislation put forward. 9 Democrats voted for Cruz, but the Democrats filibustered the bill, prevented it from passing. We'll find out more about the details of how this terrorist acquired the firearm. I can tell you another horrific attack on a church, Sutherland Springs in Texas, the worst church shooting in U.S. history. In that instance, there is a very significant possibility if Cruz had passed, if the Democrats had not filibustered it, that church shooting wouldn't have happened. Why? Because the deranged gunman in that instance was already ineligible to buy a firearm. He had a criminal conviction, a felony conviction, he had a domestic violence conviction, and he had a mental health adjudication. All of those made it illegal for him to buy a firearm. The reason he was able to buy a firearm is because the Air Force under the Obama administration never reported his conviction to the database. So when he went to buy his gun, they ran a background check. But because his conviction wasn't in the database, the background check came up clean. Cruz would have required a federal audit from the Department of Justice of every federal agency designed to catch convictions like that of this gunman and put them in the database. And then secondly, the gun crime task force directed by Cruz directed the Department of Justice, when a felon or fugitive tries to illegally buy a firearm, DOJ is to go in, prosecute him, and put him in jail. When that gunman went to buy his firearm in Sutherland Springs, he checked the box on the form that said he didn't have a felony. He checked the box that said he didn't have a domestic violence conviction. He checked the box that said he didn't have a mental health adjudication. All of those were lies. Each of those lies was itself a separate felony with up to 5 years in prison. Had Cruz passed, he would have been prevented from buying his gun because his conviction would have been in the database, and the Department of Justice would have showed up, prosecuted him, and he would have been in prison instead of in that beautiful sanctuary murdering those people. We need to focus on stopping bad guys. In this instance, this terrorist, if we'd stopped him from coming into the United States before he got here, the congregants at Beth Israel would not have faced this terror situation. And so I believe the right approach is to target the bad guys, to target felons, to target fugitives, to target terrorists, and at the same time to protect the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. The danger is from the lawbreakers and violent criminals. It's not from law-abiding citizens protecting their own families. All right, thank you, everybody. Jack, I'm happy to talk another time, but I want to keep this focused on the synagogue. And as you know, I'm happy to talk about that topic pretty much any time.